Welcome to my field of dreams. It reaches far and wide. To you it might seem nothing much, but I stand here with pride. If you build it, they will come. I once heard it said.
Hi, I'm Nemo James, singer, songwriter, and author, and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, Nemo James Travel Diaries. This podcast is ad-free, but I hope you will forgive me for including short excerpts of some of my songs. If you would like to hear more of the songs I include, you will find a link to them in the show notes below. If you enjoy this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. On this episode, we will be traveling to Trujillo, Huanchaco, Chiclayo, Chappari, and San Lorenzo Island. We caught the 3 p.m. coach for the 9-hour journey to Trujillo in the north of Peru. I had been looking forward to the journey as the Brazilian coaches were so good, but this was a whole different kettle of ball games. We took our seats on the top deck, and I was alarmed at how hot it was. The idea of a coach with no air conditioning was inconceivable, so I assumed it was because we were stationary, and as soon as we started moving it would cool down. It didn't. We were all gasping for breath and pleading with the steward to do something, but his response was to run up and down the stairs like a headless chicken with a wasp up his arse. We found out later that most Peruvian coaches had little or no air conditioning unless you used the camas, which were coaches with seats that reclined into a bed, but these were only for very long journeys. When the sun went down, it became cooler, and the temperature was acceptable by the time it was dark. There were several small televisions scattered along the coach, like they used to have on aeroplanes, but these didn't have earphone sockets, so we were all forced to listen to our TV whether we wanted to or not. The first film was okay as the sound was turned down, so you could just about hear it if you wanted to. The second film was about the dance group Stomp, who stomped around the place with heavy boots, making a lot of noise. I had seen them on TV at home and thought they were brilliant, but stomping away through a 2-hour film was torture. In the beginning, the sound was low, so it wasn't too much of a problem, but later, the volume was turned up full and we were sitting right under the speaker. Along with a few fellow passengers, I asked the headless chicken to turn it down, which he did, but a few minutes later it was back on at full blast. There was a couple at the back that wanted to hear the film, so we just had to put up with it. The noise was unbelievable at times, and even with both fingers stuck deep inside my ears, it was still unbearable. We had to endure 2 more films before they finally turned the television off and let us sleep. After a few hours, it became apparent that, unlike the Brazilian coaches, there were not going to be any stops, which concerned me as I was starving. Suddenly, we stopped by the side of a wooden shack, and without being given any information, the headless chicken got off the bus. We were instructed by the driver to stay in our seats, but after the smokers threatened to riot, we left the bus and stood outside for 10 minutes until the headless chicken returned. No one knew why we had stopped, and it wasn't to change driver, as there was only one driver for the 9-hour drive. Then out of nowhere, the headless chicken appeared with hot chicken and rice for everyone, which he must have picked up during the stop. I was torn between irritation at not being kept informed and bliss at being fed. I always found long road journeys very tedious, and this was no exception, although I did enjoy passing through the busy town centres. Shops were packed full of everything you could think of. Each town had several shops with a huge pile of bananas stacked from floor to ceiling. There couldn't possibly have been enough inhabitants to eat so many bananas, so I assumed they were also used for animal feed. What amused me was the number of shops selling coffins, not discreetly at the back, but in the front windows and even stacked on the pavements outside. I could just imagine the conversation in your average Peruvian household, where a mother tells her son,
"Pop round the shop and get me a kilo of bananas and a packet of biscuits. Oh, and get a coffin for Granddad. I think he's going to need one soon."
After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at our hotel in the center of Trujillo at 2 a.m. The next morning, we booked a couple of tours and then went for a general stroll around town. In the main square, Federika was hijacked by a young man trying to sell us a tour, while at the same time, an 8-year-old shoeshine boy was desperate to polish my shoes. I pointed out that brown suede sandals were not really meant to be shined, but he presented some very unconvincing arguments as to why a good polishing was just what they needed. I looked up to see if Federika had finished talking, and when I looked down, I saw the boy had put some kind of dye on my sandal. This left me with the choice of getting the boy to dye my shoes completely or living with a dark patch on the side of one shoe. Considering he only wanted to charge me 50p and said he was working to pay towards his schooling, I could hardly say no. He did the job with great care, and I ended up with a pair of sandals, a slightly darker colour than before. I gave him £1, although I would have happily given him £2 just to have left them alone. There was not much to see in Trujillo town. The Plaza de las Almas was an old colonial house, which was pleasant enough, but didn't take long to get around. The next day, we went to visit the Huaca de la Luna. The great thing about all the historical sites in that region was that they were finding new things all the time. For centuries, people looked out at large expanses of sand until a strong wind blew some of it away to reveal priceless ruins buried beneath. They started digging and found ruins beneath the ruins, so the archaeological work will probably go on forever. There was a large chamber with a strange-looking wall with vertical grooves. When someone wanted to make a speech, they stood with their back to the audience and talked into one of these grooves, which acted like a microphone. It was great for projecting the voice and avoiding low-flying fruit from angry protesters, but not so good for gauging audience reaction. Entrance to the site included a very good tour guide. The main attraction was the wall friezes and places where human sacrifices took place. At the end of the tour, we turned a corner and I was taken aback by a huge ceremonial arena where thousands of people used to gather to attend ceremonies and watch priests drink the blood of human sacrificial victims.
Yours were the best of times. That's what you say. That life was so much easier than the one you see today. Yours were the worst of times, and surely you can see that all the things you dreamt of have now come to be, as bad as things are now. These are the best of times.
We checked into Hotel Caballitos del Toro in Huanchaco, which I can only describe as eccentric. Our room was in a terrible state of decoration, and normally I would hate staying in such a dump, but we both loved it. It was more of a suite than a room. It was on the first floor and had 2 large single wooden beds pushed together, each with elaborate Inca carvings on the headboard. Huge patio doors led onto a lovely, large terrace with a sea view. There were 2 sun loungers, a patio table, and 2 chairs with an umbrella in the middle. All of that for £26 a night. The only thing that separated our terrace from the terrace next door was a row of pot plants, so we had to sleep with the door closed. Leaving them open would have given our neighbour full access to our room, as well as made it easy for an axe murderer to climb up the drainpipe from the street and get to us. The hotel was owned by a well-known Peruvian poet and his wife, and was once one of the best hotels in Peru, so it was sad to see how much it had deteriorated. The bathroom was awful and had one of those spongy bath mats, which was still soggy from previous generations of guests who stepped out of the shower. The tiling in the shower was the worst I had ever seen, and there was a single, rusty cold tap in the wash basin, from which water gushed out like a garden hose, splashing everywhere. One day, Federika found herself locked in the bathroom because the door handle wouldn't turn. To make matters worse, a spider was threatening to devour her, and she was terrified of spiders. I was on the terrace watching a video on my iPod, so it was ages before I heard her muffled screams. I tried to open the door, but when I turned the handle, it came off in my hand. I thought I was going to have to smash the door down, which was something I had wanted to do all my life, but I put the handle back in the lock and managed to wiggle it around until it opened. For the rest of our stay, we made sure the bathroom door was left open. The mattresses and pillows felt like they had been stuffed with dead dogs, and the first night I kept waking up because of the smell of drains, which I assumed was from the bathroom just a few feet away. The next morning, when I sat on the terrace, I could still smell drains, and it took a while before I realized it was a weird kind of sea smell mixed with humidity. The strange thing was that as soon as I knew it wasn't the drains, it didn't bother me anymore. At 9 p.m. every night, the large wooden doors at the entrance were closed, and to get in, we had to knock on a giant metal knocker which looked like something from the Munsters. A door within a door was opened.
Buenos noches, señores.
And Lurch popped his head out and let us in, although I had to crouch down quite a bit as the opening was so small. It was one of those places you loved and hated at the same time, and reminded you that the primary purpose of that kind of holiday was adventure. We had a surprising amount of trouble finding an organized tour of the sites, so we ended up booking a taxi driver for 5 hours for only £12, which turned out much better as it gave us more freedom. Our next stop was the Huanchaco, which was once an extraordinary city covering 26 square kilometers. Buildings were 4 stories high and made entirely of clay bricks, making it the largest clay city in the world. Heavy rains had turned most of it into nothing more than clay hills, but there was still a well-preserved area where the king and other big knobs used to live. As soon as the tour started, we entered a huge auditorium with a large platform in the middle. The king would sit at one end whilst people from all over the kingdom came to offer him gifts. Nice work if you can get it. We enjoyed the tour, but were happy to get back and spend the afternoon on the beach. The sea was rough and very shallow, so I kept crashing into rocks that were hidden just below the surface, but it was still brilliant and a welcome relief from the heat and the ancient ruins. I loved Huanchaco, which seemed to cater for everyone from the richest to the poorest. The streets were full of people trying to scratch a living, from the restaurant owner standing on the street coaxing people into his restaurant, to the old man whose wife had baked a few biscuits for him to sell for 10 pence each to people who could ill afford it, but who wanted to support him. One man sat on a street corner with a typewriter offering a letter-writing service, and another stood forlornly with a stapler in his hand, offering to staple bits of paper together. One man sat on a box selling bits and pieces like chewing gum and single cigarettes. We must have passed him 20 times during our stay, and every time his head was down while he slept soundly. Even if we wanted to buy something from him, we wouldn't have had the heart to wake him up. Surfing was a big thing in Huanchaco, as the waves were consistent and not too big. Locals still used the original fishing boats that they had made for thousands of years by packing straw tightly together. They looked the same shape and size as a canoe, except one end had been chopped off, and instead of sitting in them, people kneeled and paddled. The locals made it look easy, but the tourists who hired them lasted only a few seconds before falling off. The boats only lasted a month before they had to be thrown away. We saw a local fisherman returning from an expedition with a net full of fish. Lots of excited kids gathered around him to help untangle the fish from the nets and were given a few in payment, which they took home to their mums. We left Huanchaco for the 3-hour trip to Chiclayo by coach. Again, the air conditioning was terrible, but this time we sat downstairs where the seating area was smaller and with less area to keep cool. It was bearable. We were lucky we left when we did, because the next day there was a big demonstration with agricultural workers blocking all the roads into the cities, so we would have been stranded. The demonstrations got very nasty in some places, and some coaches were stuck on main roads for days without moving. Some protesters threw stones at the coaches, and it got so bad that the government declared a state of emergency. Because of all this, and the fact that neither of us could face another 12-hour coach journey, we decided to take a flight when the time came to return to Lima. The other reason for deciding to fly was that I hadn't realized how dangerous the coaches were and how many fatal crashes there had been. One obvious cause was that there was only ever one driver who was expected to drive non-stop for however long the journey was. Worse still was that they weren't even real coaches, but coach lorries. They were buying old lorries from overseas and sticking coach bodies on top, so the vehicle had none of the safety features expected on a coach. The death toll was so bad that the government told the coach companies to phase the coach lorries out. The coach companies' response was to go on strike, which brought the country to its knees. The government backed down and agreed to let them continue using them for another 15 years on the condition that they killed as few of their passengers as possible. One night, we only managed to finish half our dinner, which was normal as portions were always so big. In nearly all restaurants in Peru, there was a strange custom of serving both French fries and rice. Federika and I were chatting when a young boy started looking through the window and pointing to our leftover French fries, so we waved for him to come in. The waiter wasn't too pleased, but Federika explained that the boy was with us, so there was not much he could do about it. The boy sat at our table and started to devour our leftovers, and as a measure of how huge the portions were, he wasn't able to finish them. He asked if he could have one of our nylon shopping bags so he could take the remaining leftovers to his brother. We transferred the contents of one bag into another and gave him the empty one. He tipped all the leftovers into the bag and topped it up with a generous helping of mayonnaise and ketchup. We were surprised at how busy and well-developed Chiclayo was, which we were told was down to it being so well positioned for trade. The noise in the street was horrendous, with drivers continuously sounding their horns. When traffic flowed smoothly, it was bad enough with everyone making short honks, but when a taxi stopped to pick up a passenger, it held up the traffic, so all the drivers kept their hands on the horn until the taxi moved off. At first, it was funny, but it soon became very irritating. Another annoyance was that most decent cars had alarms which were continually going off for no reason. The alarm sounded for 1 minute, and then there was a break of 5 minutes before it started again. The cycle continued until the owner came along and turned it off, which sometimes took hours. One day, it went on all night and was still sounding the next morning. Our next tour was to the Huaca at Sipan. Until 1981, the only thing Sipan had to offer was sand dunes. Then one day, a local family accidentally came across an ancient burial site. They looted it, and by the time the authorities found out what was going on, 80% of its contents had disappeared and were never found. It wasn't long before they discovered another Huaca and other important burial sites in the area. A lot of those early civilizations were not familiar with the saying, "You can't take it with you." When the big knobs died, they insisted on not only being buried with all their treasure, but also their wives, concubines, servants, and even llamas. The fact that they were still alive at the time didn't seem to matter, and the only concession to their well-being was to drug them before burying them alive. What was fascinating was that inside the burial sites, everything was so neatly laid out. They had removed all the treasure and artifacts and put them safely in a museum, leaving the skeletons exposed for public viewing. After lunch, we went to the museum where all the treasures had been taken and were surprised by the contents and the professional way it was put together. The museum tour was over an hour long and included a very enthusiastic guide. It was a good tour, but with all the walking and the heat of the Huaca, I was shattered. I was horrified when we arrived at a second museum to be greeted by a second guide who was even more enthusiastic than the first one and spoke a strange mixture of English and Spanish. Fortunately, my camera packed up halfway through the tour, so I had the perfect excuse to sit down and pretend to fix it, even though I knew it was one of those weird electronic bugs that would soon fix itself. The next day, we were both in need of a rest, so we went to Pimental, which was the nearest beach to Chiclayo. It was nowhere as nice as Huanchaco, but we had a pleasant enough time lying on the sand. Instead of fighting with the waves like in Huanchaco, we had to fight with the most extraordinary current. A wave would come in, and as it went back, a current pulled us so strongly to the side that it was almost impossible to walk. Once we had learned to surrender to it and literally go with the flow, it became great fun and was a bit like riding a rapid. The beach was filthy, and we saw one family leave plastic plates half full of food on the sand when they went home. We took a taxi to another beach at Santa Rosa, recommended in Lonely Planet, but that looked even filthier and was mainly a fishing port, so we abandoned the idea and asked the taxi driver to drop us off at a small town recommended for its crafts. As far as I could see, it had all the same stuff as the other 2 million stalls in Peru, but Federika managed to find a hat she liked. I thought Lima had a lot of taxis, but it was nothing compared to Chiclayo. They were so cheap that we used them all the time, but Federika thought it would be fun to experience a colectivo. The experience started with me nearly knocking myself out on the roof of the bus as I entered through the side door. The bus was packed solid, which didn't stop them from picking up more people along the way. We knew it was going to Chiclayo, but had no idea where in Chiclayo. The street started to look more hostile, so Federika asked if the bus was going to the centre, but they informed us it wasn't and advised us to get off and get a taxi straight away, as we would be sitting targets for the cutthroats in that part of town. We got off near the main market, where all the side streets were dirt roads. In the better areas, police had the usual guns, stab vests, and other small arms, but in this area there were men in army uniforms walking in threes, carrying automatic rifles and various other impressive weaponry. We found a taxi straight away, and I was relieved to hear Federika say,
"Never again."
Somebody stole my home. It ain't nowhere to be seen. It was here last night when I turned out the light over there on that patch of green. I just can't carry on. Now my hole is gone. You better watch out, there's a thief about. Yes, somebody stole my home. Somebody stole my home. It ain't nowhere to be seen. It was here last night when I turned out the light over there on that patch of green. I just can't carry on. Now my hole is gone. You better watch out, there's a thief about. Yes, somebody stole my home.
Our next tour was to Chappari Nature Reserve and the Haunted Mountain. I found it in a brochure at the travel agent, and it claimed to have lots of wildlife, much of which was exclusive to the area. I was more interested in wildlife than ruins, so I was looking forward to it. As the last part of the journey was on a dirt road, we had to splash out on a 4x4 with driver, but it was still only £50 for the whole day. The journey alone made the trip worthwhile as we passed by rural villages and saw the way people lived. They built houses with clay bricks in the same way they had done for thousands of years. On many of the farms, there seemed to be little or no machinery, and we frequently saw people with nothing more than spades digging up huge fields. Instead of using combine harvesters, people were cutting corn and loading it onto large lorries. One man stood stark naked in a river, taking a bath in clay-coloured water, oblivious to the cars and buses driving past. In one place, the river overflowed onto the road, so for 100 meters it looked like we were driving through the river. Some drivers stopped and used the river water to wash their cars. I asked our driver to stop so I could take some photographs, and when we got out, a man approached us with 2 large buckets of fish. He had made some sort of dam in the river, so the fish were trapped, and all he had to do was pick them up. He was trying to sell fish to the people around him, whom I doubt had the money to buy them, so he saw us as his only hope. He was so desperate to sell them that the conversation with Federika went something like this.
You want to buy fish? I give you special price.
I would love to, but we're tourists and have nowhere to cook them.
But you must buy them. They are best fish in Peru.
I am sure they are, but what do I do with them if I can't cook them?
Where you are from?
England.
I will dry them and you take them home with you.
I had no doubt that his method of drying them would have involved wiping them on his filthy jeans. So hard as it was, we decided to pass on the offer. The drive was only 50 miles, but unlike most drivers in Peru who were in training for the Grand Prix, this driver was in training for the Snail Prix and drove 30 miles an hour all the way. We finally arrived at the village where a guide was supposed to be waiting for us, but the place was deserted. We discovered that the tour agency had told him we would be there at 8 a.m., which was the time we met our driver in town, so we were 2 hours late. The administration of the nature reserve was done in a small grocery store where a friendly woman took our entrance fee, and our driver came with us in search of the guide. We arrived at some kind of single-story, clay-built farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. A woman came out of the house and opened a makeshift gate. She told us to wait while she went to look for the guide, but being fed up with sitting in the car, we got out and waited in the hot sun. Half an hour later, there was still no sign of the woman, and we were wondering if she had abandoned us and gone home. Federika was all for going into the farmhouse, but our driver said there may be a wild dog in there just waiting to eat us. I am not scared of dogs usually, but invading the territory of a possibly rabid dog in deepest Peru had me slightly concerned. We eventually decided the only thing we could do was go through the farmhouse gate. The driver picked up a stick to defend us, and I stood behind him so he was first in line for the dog's dinner. Federika told us not to be so stupid and walked fearlessly to the front door, calling out to see if anyone was at home. A friendly woman with a baby appeared and announced herself as the guide's wife. Her husband thought we weren't going to turn up, so he went on to their farm to work, and now the first woman was hunting for him. During the next half hour, I became acquainted with an elderly goat who couldn't make up its mind whether I was worth the trouble of attacking or not when the guide finally turned up, so we were on our way. It was another hour's drive along potholes with the occasional bit of road in between before we arrived at the reserve. This really was in the middle of nowhere. There were a few buildings scattered around the place and some very crude toilets we were advised to use before starting on our 4-kilometre trek. In a yard just outside one of these buildings were 2 small tents, one of which appeared to be owned by a deer who was sitting half in and half out. Behind it, standing on a large rock, there was some kind of fox about the size of 2 cats glued together. It was very tame and came within a few feet of us. With 2 animal sightings within the first few minutes, we had great hopes of seeing many of the hundreds of species of birds and animals that the brochure assured us lived there. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The reserve was very big, and the owners prided themselves on giving the wildlife complete freedom. Whilst that was brilliant for the wildlife, it didn't really work for tourism. They could claim to have a family of talking penguins, and no one could ever prove otherwise. We did see a small bear, but it was very docile, as the poor thing had been rescued from a circus. They couldn't let it run free, as it wouldn't have survived on its own. We saw another bear high up in a tree, but it was so far in the distance that all we saw was a small black blob moving around. We enjoyed the day, having accepted it was nothing much more than a nice walk in the country. The best part of the walk was at the end, when we sat by a pond to eat our packed lunch. Standing on a rock just inches away from Federika was a fox looking pleadingly at her sandwich. It was so tame it accepted food from our hands and remained with us all through our lunch. We had been warned about mosquitoes, so both put plenty of insect repellent on, but no one had told us about the huge biting flies that appeared to be attracted by my repellent. Federika was lucky that she had run out of clean shorts, so she was wearing long trousers, which meant they homed in on me. They were a nuisance, but I didn't think much about it, and they didn't detract from my enjoyment of the day. It was on the drive home that I noticed that I had dozens of bites on my legs, and they were beginning to irritate me. Although it was the flies that hurt, it was the mosquitoes that had done the damage. Mosquito bites never usually bothered me, but these must have been a different type. The drive back to town was even slower than going, but unlike Federika, I could fall asleep anywhere, any time. Next morning, the bites on my legs were much worse and were itching so badly that they hurt. I must have had some kind of allergic reaction, so we went to a chemist to get some antihistamine cream and pills. They didn't help much, and as with 90% of the ailments in life, the only cure was time. Next day, we flew back to Lima and arrived at our apartment around midnight. We were delighted to see that we had been upgraded to a much better apartment on the 4th floor. It was lovely to wake up in the morning and have such a glorious view of the Huanchaco opposite and beautiful sunsets. Our next adventure was a boat tour to San Lorenzo Island, which was 22 kilometers from Lima and home to a large colony of sea lions. The boat was packed with people, and my concern started when I was told we had to wear life jackets. Until that moment, rough sea had not occurred to me, which was pretty stupid as I knew only too well how big the waves could be in that part of the world. As we pulled out of the harbour, a man came around with a tray containing cups of water and a bucket of seasick pills. I have never been seasick in my life, but have felt sick many times and hated the feeling, so I had no hesitation in popping a pill. We were told that the first half an hour would be okay, but after that it would get pretty rough. While all this was going on, there was a heated argument between an elderly Spanish woman and an obnoxious Swedish woman who insisted on using one of the precious seats for her handbag. To add to the scene, it was cold because of the thick sea mist, and together with the rough sea warning from one of the crew, it felt like we were sailing into the gates of hell. Although my anxiety disorder was under control, it was far from cured, so as a precaution, I popped a diazepam, which added to my anxiety as I had no idea if it could be taken with a seasick pill. The further out to sea we got, the colder it became as the mist got thicker, but to my great relief, the rough sea never materialized. During the voyage, we saw 1 or 2 lone sea lions and a couple of penguins. I found it difficult to tell them apart, as all we could see was something black slithering on the surface of the water. As we got close to our destination, there was a strong smell of guano, also known as bird shit, which was several meters deep on the island we were approaching. Guano is one of the best kinds of fertilizers available, and it was ironic that Federika's great-granduncle made his fortune from it, so we were staring at the source of the money that enabled us to go on such a long trip. All of a sudden, the sea became alive with sea lions, which the Spanish refer to as wolves of the sea. Some of them followed our boat whilst hundreds were lounging on the rocks, making loud, mysterious noises. I had always loved the look of sea lions, even more than dolphins, so it was a big thrill for me. We went around the island once and then stopped as it was time to jump in and swim with them. The crew handed out wetsuits, so I guessed the water must be a bit cold. We changed downstairs, and Federika had a lot of trouble getting into hers, so one of the crew helped her. She told me afterwards that she felt uncomfortable with his help, as he seemed to be enjoying the experience. I also had a lot of trouble getting into my wetsuit, and he didn't offer to help me. I finally got the suit on and was making my way to the deck when I was told that I had it on the wrong way around. The zip was supposed to be at the back, which seemed pretty stupid to me. It took me ages to take it off, and when I tried to put it on again, I couldn't understand why it was so tight until I discovered I was trying to put my leg where the arm should go. By the time I had finally got the damn thing on, everyone was already in the water playing with the sea lions. I was never crazy about swimming in cold water, but this was way beyond cold. Even with the wetsuit, I was still very uncomfortable, and as it didn't cover my feet, I was afraid they would freeze solid and drop off. I swam with my head and hands out of the water, which was no easy task and must have looked pathetic. I finally got close to the sea lions, which were swimming no more than a meter away from me. They seemed to like us being there, but wouldn't let us touch them like dolphins do. Sometimes they leapt out of the water only inches away, which was a bit of a shock but thrilling. A fantastic experience, although it would have been much more enjoyable if it weren't so cold. The Norwegians swam without wetsuits like they were in the Caribbean. The long voyage home was easier as the mist cleared, and it got warmer as we got closer to land. Thank you for listening to Nemo James Travel Diaries. Photos and videos of my adventures, together with my music and the books I have published, can be found on my website www.nemojames.com/travels. You will also find details of my mobile phone app, Wordbanker, which is designed to help you build a foreign language vocabulary. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please click the subscribe button and share it with your friends. It will mean a lot to me. In the next episode, we will be traveling to Asia Beach Club, Arequipa, Colca Canyon, Cusco, Machu Picchu, and Lima.
Do you like the songs I've sung to you? Do you like the time that we've been through? Do you like my music? Do you like to sing along? Yes, we like the songs that you have sung. We like the friends that we've become. We like your music. We like your music. We like your music and the words of your song.